The mountains were quiet, but the wind howled like a restless spirit. Snow fell in thick, icy sheets, coating every tree branch and stone path in white. The world seemed frozen in a gray, endless winter. Only the faint glow of the Alpha's black wolf insignia cut through the darkness, shining atop the gates of his fortress. Inside, the Alpha, a tall, broad-shouldered man with eyes sharp as knives, rode through the snow on his black steed. His name carried fear in every village along the mountain roads. Kale. He was known for his ruthlessness, his power unmatched in the northern territories. Many whispered that his anger could freeze fire itself, and yet beneath that fearsome mask there was a silence in his heart, a loneliness that even victory could not fill. Kale rode with his child, little Leora, bundled tightly in furs. The child's small face peeked out, eyes wide with curiosity and concern. Leora was warm-hearted, unlike her father, whose heart seemed frozen in the cold of duty and conquest. As they rode along the winding forest path, Leora tugged at Kale's sleeve. "Daddy, look!" she cried, her voice trembling. Kale slowed his horse and looked in the direction she was pointing. At the edge of the path, half buried in snow, lay a figure. She was small and fragile, hunched over to shield herself from the storm. Her clothes were torn and soaked, and her hair clung to her pale face like dark, wet vines. She shivered violently, teeth chattering with each gust of wind. Kyle narrowed his eyes. "An Omega," he muttered under his breath, noting the faint, trembling aura that surrounded her. In their world, Omegas were rare and vulnerable, often hunted or left to die in the wilds. Yet there was something about this one that caught Kale's attention. Perhaps it was her defiance even in the face of death, or maybe it was the way the storm seemed unable to fully claim her. Leora's small hand gripped Kale's arm tightly. "Daddy, please. She's freezing. We have to help her." Kale's jaw tightened. Normally he would have passed by without a second thought, leaving the weak to the mercy of the mountains. But the child's plea, innocent pure, struck something deep inside him. For a moment he felt the weight of another's life on his shoulders, and for the first time in years he hesitated. "Move closer," he commanded softly, dismounting his horse. His heavy boots crunched through the snow as he approached her. The Omega looked up, her eyes wide with fear and desperation. Kale crouched down, careful not to frighten her further. You're cold," he said, his voice low, almost rough with disuse of gentleness. "Come with me." The Omega's lips trembled, and she shook her head weakly. I can't. I have nowhere to go." Kyle looked at her, studying her every movement. He saw the marks of hardship etched into her small frame, bruises hidden beneath layers of tattered fabric, frostbite creeping along her fingers, exhaustion pulling at her body like invisible chains. And yet, despite it all, she refused to fully surrender to despair. Leora ran forward, wrapping her tiny arms around the Omega. "Please, come with us," she said, shivering but resolute. "I can share my blanket, I can—" Her words faltered, but the warmth in her eyes was undeniable. Kale's stern expression softened imperceptibly. He picked the Omega up with ease, her frail body shivering against his chest. She weighed almost nothing, yet carried the invisible weight of a broken past. The cold wind whipped against them, but Kyle wrapped her in his fur cloak, shielding her as best he could. The journey to the fortress was slow. Snowflakes fell like soft knives, stinging exposed skin. Kale kept glancing at the Omega, noticing how she flinched at every sound, the snap of a branch, the whisper of the wind. Her fear was understandable. Survival had hardened her, but trust was a language she had long forgotten. Finally, the gates of the fortress rose before them, black iron and stone carved with the symbols of Kale's ancestors. The warmth inside was faint but welcoming, a stark contrast to the blizzard outside. Servants and guards looked at the Omega with curiosity and suspicion, whispering among themselves. Kale's presence silenced them. They knew better than to question the Alpha's decisions. Inside the great hall, Kale set the Omega down gently on a heated mat near the fireplace. Flames danced, casting golden shadows on the walls. The Omega's blue eyes reflected the light, wide and wary. She remained silent, unsure if this was safety or another trap. Leora ran to the kitchen and returned with warm water and blankets. She draped them over the shivering Omega and offered her a cup of hot broth. The Omega hesitated, then slowly accepted. Her hands were too cold to hold the cup properly, and Kale watched her struggle, feeling a strange tug at his chest. Why did you save me?" she asked finally, her voice barely more than a whisper. Cale paused, considering his words. He had no answer ready. In his world, saving someone was rarely an act of kindness. It was a strategic move, a show of power. But this was different. He had no plan, no reason beyond the child's pleading eyes. "You're alive," he said simply, almost to himself. "That's reason enough." The Omega's lips quivered, but she said nothing more. She sipped the broth, trying to regain warmth and strength. Every so often, she glanced at the towering Alpha, his face shadowed in firelight. There was fear there, yes, but also a strange curiosity, as if he was studying her very soul. Hours passed. The storm outside continued, relentless. Yet within the fortress, a fragile quiet had settled. Cale watched from a distance, leaning against the stone archway. He felt something he had not felt in years. A protective urge, fierce and unyielding. Leora crawled into the Omega's lap, wrapping her tiny arms around her. "You're safe now," she murmured, her forehead resting against the Omega's chest. "Daddy won't let anything happen to you." The Omega's eyes filled with tears she had long denied herself. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt warmth, not just from the fire, but from the genuine care of another. A small hope ignited, fragile but persistent. Cale's jaw tightened again as he watched them. He didn't move closer, didn't speak. Yet his mind raced with questions he had no answers for. Who was this Omega? Why had she appeared in the mountains on such a deadly night? And most importantly, what would happen if the power in her blood awakened? A power he sensed even now, humming faintly beneath her skin. The child stirred, pressing her small hand against Kyle's leg. "Daddy, will she stay with us?" Cale looked down at Leora, then back at the Omega. The weight of responsibility settled on him, heavier than any sword or throne. His lips were set in a firm line, but inside a battle raged. Part of him wanted to turn away, to leave the past and the stranger behind. Another part, a part he had long denied, wanted to protect her, to see her live, to see something pure and unbroken survive in a world that had been cruel to both of them. The wind outside roared as if echoing the turmoil in Cale's heart, and then the Omega whispered almost to herself, "I don't belong anywhere, but maybe here." Cale's eyes narrowed, a storm of his own rising behind them. The words were simple, yet they carried weight beyond comprehension. They were a promise, a challenge, and a warning all at once. The night stretched on, the snow pounding against the stone walls like the beat of a drum. Somewhere in the darkness, something stirred, an unseen force that had been waiting for her, watching, knowing that her survival could change everything. Cale didn't notice the shadows creeping along the edges of the hall. He didn't yet understand the danger that had followed her from the mountains. But he knew this: nothing, not even the cold, not even the deathly storm outside, could strip the warmth growing between the Omega and his child. And he knew, deep in the hollow of his chest, that the night was only just beginning. Cliffhanger. A faint whisper echoed in the halls, soft but urgent. "She does not belong. Yet she is the key." Cale's eyes shot to the shadows, but no one was there. Something or someone was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The morning light spilled through the tall windows of the fortress, casting long shadows on the stone floor. Snow still clung stubbornly to the outer walls, a reminder of the storm's violence the night before. The Alpha, Kyle, sat at the edge of a long table in the hall, his eyes scanning the cold, silent room. Leora was at his side, nibbling on bread and humming a soft tune. She had taken to the Omega already, calling her gentle names, though she had yet to ask the most important question, her name. The Omega stirred in the corner, wrapped in furs and blankets. Her eyes were a striking shade of blue, pale like the frozen river beyond the gates. She had not yet spoken much, and when she did, her voice was careful, wary, almost fragile. Yet Cale could sense the strength beneath it, the kind that had kept her alive in the mountains, shivering and alone. "Do you have a name?" Cale asked finally, his voice low, cautious. He rarely asked questions that did not need answers, but something about her made him bend rules he had long enforced upon himself. The Omega looked up at him, her gaze steady, despite exhaustion. "Ilara," she said. Her voice was soft, yet it carried a quiet defiance that made Cale sit straighter. "Ilara," he repeated. The name felt foreign, fragile in the air, yet somehow fitting. He did not know why, but it stirred something deep inside him. Perhaps it was the child's presence, innocent and pure, that softened him. Or perhaps it was the faint aura of power he sensed within her. Cale's mind returned to the whispers from the previous night. Something about Alara drew attention beyond this fortress, beyond even the reach of his own pack. He could not yet name it, but the stirrings of danger were real and immediate. The day passed in a tense quiet. Cale moved through the fortress, his presence commanding but always aware of Alara's fragile figure near the hearth. He watched as she attempted to stand on her own, as she wrapped herself in furs, as she sipped the warm broth that Leora brought with gentle persistence. The child had taken to calling her Mama, and though Cale had not yet said anything, the bond forming between them unsettled him. Cale was not used to attachments. He had ruled with fear, with strength, and sometimes with ruthless cunning. Compassion was a foreign language, and yet here, before him, was someone who awakened it. Later, Alara walked through the corridors, her eyes drawn to the carvings and symbols of the fortress. She noticed the subtle tension in the guards' movements, the respect mixed with fear that followed Cale's steps. She felt it keenly, the power he held over everyone, and yet she felt no fear from him. That alone confused her. How could someone so dangerous feel so distant? Cale's gaze followed her from the shadows. He was intrigued, not merely by her strength, but by her restraint. Most Omegas would have cowered, would have begged for mercy, would have shown weakness. But Alara moved carefully, deliberately, aware of her surroundings, aware of the invisible eyes watching. She carried herself as if she belonged, and that challenged everything Cale believed about power and survival. By evening, the fortress halls were quiet again. Leora had fallen asleep, tucked against the Omega's side, breathing softly, peaceful in a way Cale had never thought possible for his child. Yet Cale could not rest. The whispers of last night returned to him. She does not belong, yet she is the key. He paced through the main hall, the shadows flickering across his stern face. He could not shake the feeling that the danger following Alara was not ordinary. It was deliberate, ancient, and patient. Something or someone had marked her, and the storm that had brought her to him might not have been random. Alara sensed the tension in the fortress too. She felt eyes on her at every turn, sensed the unspoken rules of power flowing through the stone walls. But she also felt an unexpected comfort in Cale's presence, subtle though it was. Though his exterior was cold and intimidating, there was a strange consistency in the way he moved around her, never threatening, always observant, protective in a way she had rarely encountered. The evening passed with quiet conversations. Cale asked about her past, though cautiously, avoiding anything that might force her to relive trauma. Alara spoke in fragments, revealing enough to hint at hardship, at betrayal, at nights spent fighting for survival. Each word was weighed and measured, as if she feared letting too much of herself show. Cale listened, his expression unreadable. Yet every word built a picture in his mind, a resilient survivor, someone who had endured more than most yet remained unbroken. He felt something he had long buried. Respect, yes, but also an unbidden curiosity and an unfamiliar longing. Later, as the fortress quieted for the night, Cale walked alone through the outer corridors. Snow still blanketed the courtyard, untouched except for the marks of his earlier journey. His thoughts returned to the prophecy whispered long ago in the old scrolls of his ancestors, a warning of a child and a stranger who would change the fate of the Alpha's line. He had dismissed it as he had many warnings, but now with Alara here, he wondered if perhaps some stories were not just stories. A sudden sound startled him, a soft creak from the hallway behind him. He spun, hand resting on the hilt of his sword, eyes scanning the shadows. Nothing. Only the flicker of torchlight and the quiet hum of the fortress settling for the night. Yet Cale felt it in his bones. Someone or something was watching. Meanwhile, Alara sat by the hearth in the guest chamber, Leora asleep against her. She was tense, aware that her arrival here had not gone unnoticed. Her senses, honed by months of survival, told her she had been followed at some point in the mountains. And though she was safe for now, she knew the calm was temporary. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that might be approaching. She looked at the child, so trusting, so unaware of the dangers that lurked beyond the fortress walls. A protective instinct surged within her, one she had not felt in years. She pressed her hand to Leora's small head and whispered a promise she hoped she could keep. I will keep you safe. Hours later, Kale returned to the chamber. His shadow fell over the hearth and Alara looked up, startled. The firelight glinted off his dark eyes, which were sharper than ever. He studied her silently for a long moment, as if weighing not just her words but her very presence. You are stronger than I expected, Kyle said finally, his voice low but not unkind. Stronger than most would have been in your place. Alara blinked. I had no choice. Her voice was steady, yet there was a hint of vulnerability beneath it. Kyle nodded, understanding more than she could know. Sometimes survival is the only measure of strength, but sometimes survival can be dangerous. His gaze flicked toward the shadows in the corner of the room, where the faintest movement seemed almost imperceptible. Alara followed his gaze, but saw nothing. Dangerous how? She asked, curiosity and caution mingling in her tone. Kale did not answer directly. Instead, he stepped closer, letting the warmth of his presence fill the room without breaking the space between them. There are forces at work you do not yet understand, he said, and they have been watching you for a long time. Her heart skipped a beat, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. She had survived much, but the thought of unknown patient forces tracking her stirred fear she had thought long buried. Yet within that fear there was a spark, a strange sense that she was no longer alone, that someone else could face these dangers alongside her. The night deepened, and the fire burned low. Leora slept on, untroubled by the shadows and whispers. Kale remained standing, silent and vigilant, his mind restless with questions he could not yet answer. He knew only this: bringing Alara here had changed everything. The fortress was no longer just a place of rules and power. It had become a cage, yes, but one that could also be a sanctuary. And somewhere beyond the fortress walls, the wind carried a faint, chilling whisper, almost lost in the night. She belongs to no one, yet all will bend to her. Kale's eyes narrowed. He could not ignore it. The danger that had followed her through the blizzard was real, and now it was closer than ever. But for the first time in years, Kale did not feel fear for himself. His concern was for the child and for Alara, strangers bound to him by choice and circumstance. And that, he realized, made him more vulnerable than any enemy could ever be. The storm had passed, but the real storm was only beginning. Cliffhanger. As Kale returned to the shadows near the hall, a shadow detached itself from the darkness. Eyes glinting like shards of ice, the presence of a silent observer made its move. Alara's fate, and the Alpha's, was about to be tested in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The fortress had never felt so still, and yet Kale could sense the tension in every stone and every corridor, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, the mountains slept under a blanket of frost, but within, an unseen storm was rising. Kale had not left Alara's side since the whispering shadow had been seen, though he maintained his usual stoic distance. He walked through the hallways like a silent predator, his eyes scanning for even the faintest sign of danger. Leora followed close behind, her small hand tucked into his, oblivious to the threat lurking beyond the walls. Alara remained in her chamber, tending to the fire that seemed insufficient to warm the icy chill that clung to her bones. Yet it was not cold that troubled her. It was the feeling of being watched. She had survived the cruel streets, the merciless blizzards, and even the dangers of wandering alone in the mountains, but she had never felt a presence so quiet, so patient, so knowing. Her gaze fell upon her own hands, small and pale, and she noticed the faint shimmer beneath her skin. A power she had barely acknowledged before now pulsed softly, responding to the fear and tension around her. She did not understand it fully, but she felt its pull like an invisible thread tied to something larger than herself. Kyle entered quietly, his presence filling the room with an almost tangible weight. "You feel it," he said, his voice low, careful not to startle her. Alara looked up, startled. What do you mean?" He knelt slightly, studying the faint shimmer that flickered beneath her skin. "Something is drawn to you. You carry a force within you, old and dangerous, one that has followed you for a long time, waiting for a moment like this." Her breath caught. She had always known she was different, had always sensed the eyes that followed her, the whispers that brushed her ears in the night. Yet to hear it spoken aloud by someone like Kale, someone so formidable, was another matter entirely. I don't understand," she whispered, fear and wonder mingling in her voice. Cale's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with something deeper, something he rarely let show. "Then you will learn," he said, his hand brushing briefly against hers. Not a touch of intimacy, but a gesture of acknowledgement, of warning. "And I will be there to make sure nothing destroys you before you are ready." Ilara's heart pounded. The words were comforting, yet heavy with unspoken meaning. She had always relied only on herself, had always trusted no one. And now here was a man of immense power and terrifying reputation, offering protection she had neither asked for nor fully wanted. Night fell again over the fortress, bringing shadows that crept along the walls like living things. Cale patrolled the corridors, senses alert to every whisper, every shuffle, every movement that did not belong. He could feel the approach of something ancient, something patient and cunning, drawn to Ilara's presence as surely as a predator to its prey. Ilara, meanwhile, could not sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the mountains and the endless snow. A soft knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Cale standing there, cloak wrapped tightly around his broad shoulders, eyes scanning the dark hallway behind him. "You should rest," he said simply, his tone commanding yet not harsh. I cannot," she admitted, stepping aside to let him enter. "Something is coming. I can feel it." Cale nodded, not surprised. "Then you will need to trust me." "Trust us." He glanced toward the hearth where Leora slept, oblivious to the tension that filled the air. "And you will not be alone. Not while I breathe." The night deepened, the air heavy with unspoken threats. Cale moved to stand guard near her, positioning himself in a way that would protect both her and the child. Ilara watched him, trying to read the mask of stone he usually wore. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when his eyes scanned the darkness outside the window. It was not merely caution. There was worry there and something else she could not name. Suddenly, a faint shimmer appeared in the corner of the room, a subtle ripple in the air, like a reflection on water. Ilara gasped, and Cale's hand was on his sword in a heartbeat. The shadow flickered, coalescing into a vague humanoid shape. It was faint, dark, and moving silently, yet its presence was undeniable. "You are not alone," Cale said, voice low, almost a growl. "It has been waiting for you. And now it has found us." The figure moved closer, and Ilara felt the pull in her chest, the faint hum beneath her skin rising. Fear and recognition mingled. She knew this presence. It was tied to her past, to the nights she had survived alone, to the power she had barely understood. And yet, she had never seen it so close, never felt it so deliberate, so alive. Cale stepped forward, placing himself between Ilara and the shadow. "Leave her," he commanded. "Or face me." The shadow hesitated, as if considering his words, and then, in a swirl of darkness, it vanished into the corners of the room, leaving only the faintest trace of cold in the air. Ilara exhaled shakily. It wanted me," she whispered. "All this time, it was following me." Kyle's eyes softened slightly, a rare display of emotion, and it still is. "But you are not alone now. Not while I stand here." For a moment, silence fell between them. The tension that had filled the room hours before remained. But a bond had been forged in that shared danger. A bond built on protection, trust, and the faint beginnings of respect. The next morning brought light, but not peace. Ilara began to explore the fortress more confidently, moving through the halls with quiet grace, sensing the layers of power and history embedded in the stone walls. She watched Cale interact with the guards and servants, noting the fear and respect his presence commanded. And yet in private, he was a different man, caring, deliberate, almost human in ways the outside world would never see. Leora clung to her, holding her hand as they walked, whispering questions about the fortress and the mountains and the stars. Ilara smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through the frost of her past. She had survived alone for so long, yet here she felt a small, fragile sense of belonging. But Cale remained watchful. He had seen the faint shimmer in her eyes again, that pulse of power that spoke of things older than the mountains, older than the kingdom itself. He understood now why the shadows had been drawn to her, why danger lingered around every corner of her life. The Omega she had been, the survivor she had become, and the force she carried within her. These were all pieces of a puzzle that would challenge him in ways he could not yet predict. As night fell, Kyle stood by the window of the main hall, looking out at the frozen expanse of the mountains. The wind howled like it had the night they found Alara, and for a moment he could almost hear the whispers of the shadows, waiting, patient, relentless. He did not turn to her room, but he knew she was awake. He knew she would sense the pull of her own power, and the presence that haunted her even now, and he knew, with a weight in his chest he had never felt before, that he could not allow her to face it alone. The bond between them, between Alpha, Omega, and Child, was growing, quiet but undeniable. And with it came a new realization. Protection was no longer merely a duty. It had become something deeper, something personal, something that stirred emotions Cale had long buried beneath layers of control and fear. And somewhere in the shadows, beyond the walls of the fortress, the patient watcher stirred again. The whispers carried through the night, barely audible but urgent. The key is within her. The Alpha cannot keep her forever. The claim is coming. Kyle's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, but this time it was not rage that drove him. It was resolve. He would face whatever came, whatever darkness had followed her through the mountains. And he would protect Alara, no matter the cost. The night was heavy, alive with tension. The Omega was not just a survivor. She was the beginning of something greater. And Cale, the ruthless Alpha, had already begun to feel the stirrings of a change he could neither deny nor control. Cliffhanger. Just as the first light of dawn touched the mountains, a soft, chilling whisper echoed through Alara's chamber. You cannot hide. The claim is near, and it is coming for you. The fortress lay under a blanket of snow, cold and silent. But inside the air was heavy with tension. Cale could feel it in every step he took, in every shadow that flickered across the stone walls. Alara had grown stronger in the past days, but the unseen threat that followed her had not diminished. The whispers in the dark were patient, insistent, as if waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. Kyle walked through the corridors, his cloak brushing the stone floors. Leora followed closely, small feet careful on the icy stones. She had begun to call Alara Mama freely now, tugging her hand and asking endless questions about the fortress, the mountains, and even the stars. Watching them together stirred a protective instinct in Kyle, one he had never known could exist alongside duty and authority. Alara, meanwhile, had begun to explore the fortress with quiet confidence. She moved like a shadow, observing the guards and servants, sensing the subtle rules of power that guided their every action. Though she had survived on the streets and mountains, she had never felt this level of scrutiny, nor the comfort of someone truly watching over her. Yet Cale did not merely watch, he anticipated, he shielded. He ensured that nothing could touch her unless he allowed it. The child's laughter echoed in the hall as Leora showed Alara a hidden alcove filled with old tapestries. Alara smiled genuinely, a warmth breaking through the frost of her past. For the first time in years, she felt a small, fragile sense of belonging, and Cale, standing in the shadows, felt something stir in his chest that he had long buried beneath rules and fear. Hope. But the calm was fragile. That night, as the wind howled outside, Cale sensed the approach of danger once more. Shadows moved differently now, deliberate and unyielding. He could feel the pull of the supernatural force that had followed Alara from the mountains. It was patient, cunning, and growing stronger with every passing day. Alara felt it too. Sitting by the fire in her chamber, she noticed the faint shimmer beneath her skin rising again, responding to the invisible presence that had haunted her since the night Cale had found her. She had begun to understand that her power was not just for survival. It was a force that could shape events around her. And yet she had no control, no guidance, and no way to predict the consequences of its awakening. Cale entered quietly, his presence filling the room with a weight she could feel even without seeing him clearly. You should rest, he said, his voice low, careful. The night brings danger, yes, but it also brings clarity. You need strength for what is coming. Alara looked up, eyes wide. I cannot sleep, she admitted. Something is coming. I can feel it. Kyle nodded, understanding more than she realized. Then you will trust me to protect you, he said. And you will trust that the child is safe. Not everything can be faced alone. Their eyes met, and for a moment the cold of the night and the tension between them melted into something unspoken but undeniable. There was a bond forming, quiet but powerful, built not on words but on shared experience, on the instinct to protect and survive. Suddenly, A harsh sound broke the fragile peace. The doors to the chamber rattled violently. Cale moved immediately, stepping between Alara and the source of the noise. Shadows flickered along the walls, and a chill filled the room as the same dark presence from before began to take form. "You cannot hide," a voice whispered, low and jagged, as if carried on the wind itself. "She is mine by right." Cale's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the hilt of his sword. "She is under my protection," he growled. "You will not touch her while I breathe." Alara felt the pull within her grow stronger. The force inside her surged in response to the threat, though she could not control it. Fear mixed with determination, and she realized that this confrontation was unavoidable. She would have to face the darkness not alone, but with Cale and Leora by her side. The shadow moved closer in almost solid shape now, and Cale's sword met it with a clash of power that made the walls tremble. Alara reached out instinctively, her hands glowing faintly with a pale light. The presence recoiled, startled by her sudden strength. And for the first time, Cale saw her not just as fragile or in need of protection, but as a force in her own right. "Do not hold back," he said, voice low but firm. "Show it who you are." Alara concentrated, and the light in her hands pulsed, pushing against the shadow. It shrieked, recoiling into the corner of the room before vanishing completely. The chill in the air remained, a reminder that the danger was not gone, only delayed. Cale exhaled, tension leaving him slowly, and looked at Alara. "You are stronger than I thought," he said quietly. "And that strength. It will save you if you learn to control it." She nodded, still trembling, but a spark of determination had ignited. For the first time, she realized that her power was not a curse to fear, but a tool to survive, to fight, and perhaps even to change the world around her. The child stirred, blinking sleepily. "Is it gone?" Leora asked, rubbing her eyes. Cale kneeled beside her, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "For now," he said. "But we must remain vigilant." Alara watched him, feeling a strange warmth despite the lingering fear. The Alpha, feared by many, had chosen to protect her. The child, innocent and trusting, had brought her into this fragile family, and she realized that in some small way she was beginning to belong. The days that followed were filled with quiet training and preparation. Cale taught Alara to move through the fortress with purpose, to anticipate danger, and to trust not only her own instincts but also the protection he offered. Leora, ever curious and brave, became a constant presence, reminding both of them of what they were fighting to protect. Not just their lives, but something more. Hope. But the shadows were not idle. Each night they returned, faint at first, then stronger, testing their defenses and their resolve. And each night Cale and Alara faced them together, learning to anticipate, to defend, and to rely on one another in ways neither had expected. With every shared danger, the bond between them deepened. Cale's cold exterior softened, revealing a man capable of empathy, of patience, of care that went beyond duty. Alara, in turn, learned to trust not only her own strength but the strength of others, realizing that even the fiercest warriors needed allies and sometimes even love. And yet, the threat lingered, patient and relentless. Cale could feel it in the air, in the way the shadows moved in the corners of the fortress, in the faint whispers that only Alara seemed to sense. The night would bring new tests, new challenges, and perhaps new revelations about the power she carried and the destiny that had brought her to him. The storm outside had long passed, leaving the mountains calm and white. But within the fortress, a different storm raged. A storm of emotion, of power, of bonds forming in the face of darkness. Cale, ever vigilant, knew that the days ahead would test them all, and that the bond they had forged would be the only thing strong enough to withstand the trials to come. Cliffhanger. As the moon rose high over the mountains, a faint, chilling voice whispered through the halls, barely audible but urgent. "She cannot escape. The claim draws near, and it will take everything he loves." Cale's eyes narrowed in the shadows. He understood now. The danger was closer than ever, and nothing would be safe. Not the child, not Alara, not the fortress itself. The fortress shivered under the first snow of winter's deepest night. Inside, Cale moved like a shadow, silent and controlled, his eyes sharp as he scanned every corridor, every corner for the faintest hint of danger. The unseen presence that had haunted Alara for weeks was no longer subtle. It pressed at the edges of the fortress, Patient, insistent, relentless. Elara sat near the hearth with Leora, her hands resting lightly on the child's shoulders. The flickering fire cast warm light across their faces, yet she could not ignore the pull beneath her skin, the growing hum of the power she carried. She had learned to control it in part, but tonight it pulsed stronger than ever, responding to the darkness outside. Kyle joined her without announcement, placing a hand lightly on the back of the chair, his eyes fixed on the frozen night beyond the windows. "It's here," he said simply. No fear touched his voice, only determination. "And it will not leave without a fight." Elara nodded, her jaw tightening. "Then we fight," she said, a new confidence in her voice. She had survived so much already. She would survive this too, and she would not be alone. Outside, the wind carried whispers, faint at first, growing louder as shadows stretched and shifted across the snow. Kyle drew his sword, the blade gleaming in the moonlight. He moved like a sentinel, every muscle coiled and ready, eyes tracking the slightest movement. Leora clutched Elara's hand, her small body trembling but her trust unshakable. The shadows gathered at the edge of the fortress, taking shape, forming dark, indistinct figures. They moved like smoke and mist, yet their presence was solid, menacing. Elara felt the pull of her power respond automatically, a protective force rising to meet the threat. She rose to her feet, her gaze steady, glowing faintly with the energy she had yet to fully understand. Kale stepped closer, positioning himself between the Omega, the child, and the approaching darkness. "Stay close to her," he instructed the guards, who stood silently behind him, swords drawn. "And whatever happens, do not falter." The shadowed figures surged forward and the air crackled with tension. Elara reached out instinctively, her hands glowing brighter as the force within her met the darkness head-on. The shadows recoiled, shrieking, swirling into the night like smoke caught in a storm. Kale moved with precision, his sword cutting through the black tendrils that tried to reach Elara. Every strike was measured, controlled, a deadly dance honed over years of battles. But tonight was different, not just a fight of strength, but a test of trust, of bond, of the unseen connection that now linked him, the Omega, and the child. Elara's hands pulsed with light, pushing the shadows back, weaving the energy around Kale's strikes like a shield. She was learning, adapting, finding the rhythm between her power and his skill. Together, they became something greater than either alone, an unstoppable force defending the vulnerable. The shadows faltered, but one figure remained, taller, darker, its presence more commanding than the rest. It stepped forward, eyes like shards of ice cutting through the night. "You cannot keep her," it whispered, voice carried on the wind yet sharp enough to make hearts tremble. "She belongs to the night." "She always has." Kale's jaw tightened. "She belongs here. With me, with this child. And no shadow, no curse, no force in this world will take her from us." The figure lunged faster than thought, and Kale met it with a clash of steel and energy that shook the courtyard. Elara's power flared, and for a moment the force around her was blinding, white-hot, almost uncontrollable. She closed her eyes, focusing, pulling the strength not only from herself but from the bond she shared with Kale and Leora. A surge of warmth passed through her, and the shadow faltered, recoiling under the combined force of her power and Kale's skill. He struck again, a precise blow that sent the darkness shivering back into the void from which it had come. The silence after the clash was thick and heavy. The snow settled quietly around the fortress, untouched except for the marks of battle. Elara's hands glowed faintly before the energy faded, leaving her breathless but unbroken. Leora ran into her arms, wrapping herself around the child with a relief that made both women smile softly. Kyle lowered his sword, sweat glistening on his brow, yet his expression softened as he looked at them. He could see it in Elara, the resilience, the strength, the newfound command over the force within her. She had survived the night not only because of him, but because of herself. And he realized with a rare humility that protecting her had become more than duty. It had become a promise. "Are you both all right?" he asked, his voice careful, carrying the weight of concern he rarely allowed himself to show. "We are," Elara said softly, hugging Leora tightly. "Thanks to you, and to each other." Kyle nodded, eyes lingering on her with a depth she could feel even without words. He understood now that the bond forged through shared danger and care was stronger than any force that sought to tear them apart. He had begun to care for her in ways that defied reason, ways that even he could not name. The child looked up at them, eyes wide and innocent. "We're safe now?" she asked, her voice small but confident. Cale knelt, placing a protective hand over her head. "Yes," he said. "For now. And I promise I will do everything to keep it that way." The night settled around them, peaceful but tinged with vigilance. They knew the threat had been delayed, not destroyed. But they also knew something stronger had been forged tonight. A bond between Alpha, Omega, and Child, unbreakable even by the darkest of shadows. Days passed after the battle, quiet and deliberate. Cale taught Elara more about controlling her power, about trusting not only her instincts but also the strength of those who fought beside her. Leora became a constant reminder of what they protected, of the light that existed even in a world filled with darkness. Elara learned to move with purpose, to anticipate danger, and to channel the energy within her with growing skill. Kyle watched her, proud yet cautious, aware that her power was both a gift and a responsibility. He had seen her survive so much, and now he realized that she was no longer fragile but formidable, a true partner in every sense. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something deeper began to grow between them. The trust that had formed in the heat of danger blossomed into care, into affection, into a bond neither could deny. Cale, who had once ruled with fear and authority alone, found himself protecting not just a survivor, but someone who had touched his heart in ways he had thought impossible. One evening, as the snow fell silently over the fortress, Kyle stood with Elara and Leora at the balcony, gazing at the mountains bathed in moonlight. The world felt vast and still, yet they were together, unbroken, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "Elara," Cale said, his voice low but steady. "Whatever comes next, we face it together, you, me, and Leora. No one will tear this bond apart. I swear it." Elara looked at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight and the trust she had come to place in him. "I believe you," she said softly, "and I choose to face it with you." Leora clapped her hands, happy and unafraid, sensing the peace and strength that radiated from both of them. And in that moment, Cale allowed himself a rare smile, a quiet acknowledgement that they had survived not only the darkness outside, but the darkness within themselves. The night passed, calm and quiet. Outside, the world was vast, uncertain, and still dangerous. But within the fortress walls, a family had formed, a bond forged in snow, fire, and battle, unbroken by shadows, unshaken by fear. Cale, the ruthless Alpha, had discovered that true strength was not only in command or combat, but in protection, in trust, and in love. Elara, the Omega who had once survived alone, had found safety, companionship, and belonging. And Leora, the child who had cried for help in the storm, had found parents willing to protect her at all costs. The threat that had haunted them still lingered beyond the mountains, patient and relentless. But now they were ready. Together they could face any darkness, any shadow, any force that dared to challenge them. And in their unity, they found something that no enemy could touch: hope, trust, and the enduring power of a bond forged through survival, courage, and love. As the first light of dawn touched the mountains, Cale stood with Elara and Leora holding them close, feeling the warmth of a bond that no shadow could break. And somewhere beyond the peaks, the faint whispers of the past faded, powerless against the strength of what they had become. Ending note. The storm had passed. The night of danger had ended. But the Alpha, the Omega, and the child had emerged stronger, united and ready to face whatever the world would bring, together, unbroken, and unafraid.